Well, hey, everybody. Dennis Tooley here with the MS Warriors Way podcast and Multiple Sclerosis TV. And it's Wear Orange Wednesday, so I'm sporting my orange. And if you look at it, I'm actually supporting the MS Cruisers because that's how I roll. Anyway, hey, one of the things that many of you who have MS already know. If you're new to the MS game, you're probably just learning some of these things. But multiple sclerosis has a horrible way of messing with our memory. It just happens. And it's bad enough that I'm old and old people have trouble with their memory as well. You combine those two and it's a mess. Anyway, today I have a very special guest with me here on the MS Warriors Way podcast to talk a little bit about things we can do to help us when it comes to our failing memories. It's one of those frustrating things that we deal with MS, and sometimes we need somebody to come alongside of us and share some thoughts and ideas of things we can do to help us remember, either maybe help us remember now, but more importantly, help us remember down the road. And so joining me today here on the MS Warriors Way podcast is my friend, Kara Long. Kara is the founder of the Memory Collective. She's kind of made it her purpose in life to help people restore memory and keep memory for the long term so that they can share it and pass it on. And so I'm excited to have her with us here on the podcast. Let's bring her on. Kara, welcome to the MS Warriors Way podcast.
Thanks for having me, Dennis. Great to be here.
So tell me a little bit about the Memory Collective. What kind of led you to start the Memory Collective?
Sure. So it's been kind of a lifelong process of getting me to where I had the audacity to leave my my W-2 job and become an entrepreneur. Took a lot of things falling into place all at the right time, but I'd say the biggest impetus for starting the Memory Collective really falls on just my history. I have lost a lot of people in my life. It started with my brother when I was 12. He was 12 years older than me, and he drowned. That was a really, really big moment for me, very life-altering. And then less than a year later, my dad developed a rare disease called amyloidosis, and he passed away when I was 13. And at that same time, right about the same time, my favorite person, my Aunt Pat, was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And so that was a lot all kind of congregated together, but I made it through all of that, and I've made it through more losses after that. But a lot of that just led me down this path of searching for silver linings. And as an adult now, I look back and see all the memories that I've lost. I only have one memory left of my brother. I only saw him because of the age gap and just how young I was. I really only have one memory left of him. And it's just kind of a scattered, I don't remember conversation or anything like that, but that's all I have left of him, other than what people tell me about him.
Right.
And then with my dad, I have a lot more memories with him, but I can't help but think that if I had a way back then, if I had known to write down some of those memories then, how many more I would have right now. And the same goes with my Aunt Pat. And so those experiences, coupled with just my interest in writing, storytelling, sharing human interaction. I love talking with people and hearing their stories, sharing my own stories, and just a love of knowledge and history and bringing people together. All of that kind of culminated in the Memory Collective. And so I started that in pretty early 2019, actually on not intentionally on the anniversary of the date that Aunt Pat passed away, but as it happens. So, so yeah, that's
it's
pretty much it.
It's some of those things that when you have triggers like that have a specific and basically life altering happening, it's interesting how those dates roll around and intentionally or not,
Sure.
something special happens at those times, whether we intended it to or not. But when we look back, we say, wow, I didn't put those two together necessarily, but yes. And some might call it the hand of God. Some might call it kismet. Some might call it
serendipity.
Well, we could call it a lot of different things, I guess. And I was running out of words to say, so I'm glad you threw that in. But when it comes to, particularly for me and for people that will watch either on YouTube or listen to this podcast on the audio version, with people with MS, it's fairly common. It's not necessarily something that's guaranteed to happen with somebody with MS, but it's pretty common that we have issues with memory. Short-term memory is one thing, and I'll be honest, my short-term memory is, well, it's almost non-existent some days. And then there are times when I used to be quite proud of the fact of everything that I could remember from when I was a kid, and but I'm realizing that even those memories that I thought I would always remember are fading with frequency now.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to have you on the podcast to help us and to talk with us about what are some things that we can be putting into practice that will help us secure those memories so we don't lose them forever. And are there techniques that we can use that might even help us with the short-term memory issues, from day to day? But what are those? Are there ideas or tips that you might have for us that'll help us kind of restore and hold on to major memories?
Sure. So I want to start off with a disclaimer. Like, I have not studied memory in a medical sense or a scientific sense. The tips that I have are ones that I have either learned about or developed myself just as I have gone through the memory preservation process on myself through my company, but honestly, just as a personal project. So I want to be clear that I'm sure that there are more that I will research in the future, and if I get to that point where I have even more, I'd love to come back and add those to the list. But what I understand right now, and this is kind of like when I help people in my company preserve their memories, these are the kinds of things that I suggest to them to help them draw out those long ago memories, not necessarily the short term, though I do have a few ideas for short term as well. So for the long-term memories, one of the things that I will have people do is, honestly, it's very simple, but it's just to start building a timeline of your life and the periods. I'm highly analytical. I make lists constantly. Some people are not like that, and this may not be like an obvious thing for them to do, but I think that by breaking down your life and listing out just the various components of the things that were and are important to you still, you can break things up by your age. So like, young, like what are your earliest memories that you have? Who do you know were the people that were in your life from a very young age, who took care of you, who helped raise you, those types of things. It can go then into childhood. For me, childhood is broken down kind of by interests, because I had a lot of hobbies. So I have a lot of, I'm an only child. And to clarify, my brother was my stepbrother. So I grew up kind of as an only child with 2 step siblings that I was very close with. But when I was at my dad's, I was very solitary. And so I did a lot of just hobbies like drawing and listening to music and singing, playing instruments, playing with Legos and imagining worlds. And I would go, we live on a creek. And so I would go creek stomping. And these are all like, just every time I think about that, like I'm just flooded with memories. Now, those memories may not be like a specific instance. They might be more vague, but that's still something. It's not nothing.
Right.
So then I would go into, the rest of my life, and you can, every human life is going to have a different set of kind of parameters, a different way to break down that sequence in your timeline. But you could even break it down. Like I've got a document pulled up to help me here with kind of how I do this for myself. So like when I was a kid, living in Indiana, we have very concrete, or used to have concrete seasons. So I was really big into nature, still am. And so those seasons also defined a lot of the memories that I have. You could break it up like that. Like, what are the activities that you always did in the summer versus the spring versus the fall versus the winter? What are family traditions that you have that you always did during those times, not necessarily of your life, but just broken down by that season? You could think of like your favorite toys that you had. You could think of your favorite people and your favorite memories that you have with them. Favorite places that you've gone to. And that doesn't have to be like a vacation. That could literally, like, one of my favorite places is, I live in my childhood home right now. That's where I am right now. So this is both past and present. Favorite places is my front porch, because that's where my dad and I would sit during thunderstorms, and he would teach me about the relationship between thunder and lightning. And we would just listen and kind of experience these thunderstorms in a way that would just, I love thunderstorms to this day because of those memories that I have on that porch. And so you can break things down really however you want, but by making these lists of just kind of things that are important to you, and by breaking things down by periods, that could be age, whatever that means to you. That's a really easy way to start. And you'd be surprised at how rapidly you can start generating ideas. And I think the key is just that when those memories do come up, write down something to capture what that is, so that, with enough detail that you can either trigger it so that you can recall it again. And I would argue that if you're not specific enough, and this goes, I would say, for people with or without MS, the more detail that you can provide, the better chance that you're going to be able to recall these memories long term. Because if you don't, if you just write, for instance, like first boyfriend, for instance, that may mean something to you now while you still have those memories. So that cue might recall something for me, but in 40 years for me, if I were affected by some type of memory affective disorder, that may not mean anything to me anymore in 40 years. Yeah. So it's important that if you have those memories now and you want to recall them later, to write them down or do something to preserve them as they are, which is what I do at my company.
I think it's an interesting exercise for everyone, but for us to sit down. And I like the idea of kind of chopping things into those memory starters. You know, what did I do in the summertime when I was a kid? What did I do when it was wintertime? And what was it like during those times? And to take and kind of give yourself a starting point to get the things rolling.
Yeah.
To sit down and write those things down so that you have a recorded memory of all of that, and hopefully it'll generate some thought that you, because you haven't thought about it for such a long time, that you start remembering things. I know when I get together with my brothers and we start talking, things will come up, and all of a sudden I'll remember stuff I hadn't thought about in years because it was a funny story that happened, and we're like, oh yeah, remember? And but to sit down and write those things down, and or to even, you know, I wish more often, I wish I would have had recordings of the conversations that my brothers and I have had when we've been together, you know.
Yeah, same.
So if we take the time then to jot down those ideas, we're writing down those ideas, we're making those lists of memories and those key points of memories. What do we do with all of that to make sure that we don't lose it? Because I know me, I'll put it in a nice safe place and I won't know where I put it. So
Sure. So for that, I guess I would say it really just depends on you and your preferences. I mean, if someone is tech savvy enough for a computer, putting it into a digital format and then backing it up on the cloud, or honestly, like if we go the professional IT recommendation, it would be multiple forms of backup on the cloud, off the cloud, and everything. If you're going the physical route, the analog route of writing things out, I would honestly just make sure that someone knows that it exists. Because if, you know, in the case of like dementia, you may do all this work, but you may not even remember that you did the work.
right.
And so letting someone know that you've done this and where it is, and just that it exists and how to find it, and that it means something to you. And especially if it's something that contains memories that other people might also want to have, to make sure that that they have access to that and could potentially, I don't know completely about the scientific research behind this, but just the idea that for any type of memory affected disorder, to be able to have someone else kind of go through this list with you, because if you wrote these memories down, they were clearly left an impression on you enough that you would want to remember them. So for somebody else to be able to take this list or these descriptions or whatever it ends up being and be able to kind of read them back to you, from my understanding, there can be some positive effect on being able to recall that. I can't quote any statistics on that or like how often that does help, but I know that just from, you know, there are kind of two sides to being affected by a memory disorder. There's you who has it, and then there's also the people who love you, who see you in that state and who not being able to remember those things anymore.
Right.
And at a certain stage, it can actually, it's almost like doing them a service by still allowing them to have those memories of you. So like, if that makes sense, like it's about you, and it's also about the people that you love and you care about, still being able to remember those things and be able to pass those memories down. That's right. One of the things that I think about a lot, like with just my dad, for instance. If my husband and I have kids, they'll never know their grandpa except through the stories that I can share with them. That's the only way that they can know him. So the more that I can remember about him, the more I can keep him alive in spirit, in memory, and to honor him. And he was a teacher, and there are a lot of teachers out there. So it's something that he can continue teaching through the things that I pass on, and the things that are meaningful to everybody, whether you're a teacher or a doctor or a janitor. It doesn't matter. Whatever your intrinsic philosophies on life, your life experience, those are things that can be of value, not just to you and to your immediate family, but also to future generations. That's how I look at it.
Right. And I will say this, because you've mentioned a couple of different times, I don't have the scientific background. Quite honestly, I don't worry so much about understanding the science of all of it. I want to have some practical tools that help me with keeping my memories straight. And then, quite honestly, for my son, who, now he's living out in Portland, and so he's not even here. And so to have those places where we can go back when we are together, and he can actually think and have something where he could ask me questions that might actually help me remember, or he may be able to remind me of something that I have forgotten. And I think that the idea of having that written down, and putting, maybe those important milestones in place so that we can go back and remember them together. I think it's an important part of our lifetime together.
Absolutely.
So, with the Memory Collective, then, what are some of the things that if somebody says, "Hey, Kara, tell me more about the Memory Collective. What are some of the services or the resources that you have to help capture people's memories and put them into place?" What are some of the things that you have from the Memory Collective that help with that?
Sure. So if someone is interested, well, I guess first of all, I can preserve. It's just a conversation. That's how it always starts out. So it doesn't matter what the subject is, in terms of I only do this or I only do that. It can be anything that's important to you, or important to another individual. It could be, for instance, maybe a middle-aged person who has an elderly parent who wants to be able to remember all of the things, kind of wants to capture the wisdom and experience and memories of their elderly parent. So it could be that, or it could be, I've got young kids and I want to capture my memories of them while they're little, because they grow up so fast that I can't recall, I physically cannot remember all of the cute little things that they do, or the hilarious moments where I'm so mad at you, but I can't help but laugh because what you did was just really clever, or something, whatever it is. But we can't remember everything. It's not possible, but we can do our best to remember the highlights. And that is what I help people do. And I shouldn't say I just help them with the highlights. I help them remember and capture as much as they currently have that they want to preserve about a topic or many topics. So the various services that I offer range from literally just an interview. The very base would be me coming to you and interviewing you. And I say interview, it's a very casual, it's more like a mostly one-sided conversation. Because you are the one preserving your memories, not me. But I'm asking questions and just trying to fill in gaps where something may make perfect sense to you the way that you've just told it, but to me it feels ambiguous, or it feels like, you know, it sounds like there's so much more to that story. Can you fill in a little bit more? And in that way, I help for kind of future generations, if they're listening, to not be confused and to get kind of the full impact of what you were trying to say.
Right.
So, so I'll do an interview, and it could literally, it could stop there. I use this, which is just an H4n microphone, portable. Okay. And so it's not video. A lot of people feel uncomfortable on video, and although it's becoming more and more common, but at some point you're just kind of a talking head, so to speak. So it can, I feel like just doing audio actually captures, it emphasizes the voice. And that's one of the biggest things that a lot of people don't think about. The voice is one of the first memories that you lose. I can't remember what my brother's voice sounded like. I couldn't like really create it, because sound is a very abstract, very specific kind of thing. And to recall that very specifically, I think requires maybe a certain kind of mind to be able to do that. That isn't very common. And so to have your voice captured on recording, that in and of itself is one of the most powerful things that you could have, one of the most meaningful things that you could have. So, so the baseline product is just an interview and audio recordings. And I've tried to price everything so that at the very least, most people should be able to do that. From there, all of my services are basically additive. We always start with that base interview and audio, because I feel like if you are the type of person who already writes, and you've already like documented your entire life story in like a biography, you probably don't need my specific service. But if you're somebody who like doesn't know where to start, or you feel overwhelmed, you're not a writer, the idea of a blank page is just super intimidating, you don't know punctuation or grammar, and you don't even want to have to think about that. For a lot of people, it's so much easier to tell stories. I think most people are natural storytellers. So I think that it makes it, one, faster and less time consuming for them to be able to just kind of collect, like I shared earlier with the list. And I do have, I want to eventually get back, I have more tooltips to be able to recall memories, but
okay.
So yeah, I think it's just easier for some people to be able to have a conversation. Just, I always have this picture in my head of like sitting down on the couch or by a campfire or out in the backyard on a picnic table, just like you and your brothers getting together and having a conversation that sparks memories. That is essentially what I'm doing when I do that baseline service with people. I am just that person sitting down with you on your couch, at your living room table, dining room table, whatever, and just asking questions about your life. It's very casual. And so yeah, that's kind of the baseline product. And then from there, I can do what I call indexing to those audio files, so that, for instance, and I have done specifically with a man who has MS, who wanted to do this exact service for this exact reason. We interviewed for 13 hours, not straight, but we broke it up into multiple days, usually like averaging 2 or 3 hours. And he told me, I don't even think we're done yet, but he told me so much of his life story, because he's concerned that, he's in his 50s now, but he has according to the brain scan, has the brain of an 85-year-old. and you wouldn't know it. I mean, like, I never would have guessed that he had MS or had been affected at all, but it's a serious concern. So so I index those files because with 13 hour, even an hour of audio, you don't necessarily want to have to go back and listen to that entire hour or 13 hours to be able to find one specific thing that you're trying to recall.
Right.
So I go through and index it, and basically I'm just creating kind of like tracks. Think of them as the scenes, if you will, of like an audiobook.
Right.
And then I deliver just a series of audio files. I'm looking into actually turning it into an audiobook so that it would play in an audiobook reader. So that's a possibility, but the point is it's an audio file.
Right.
And from that point, you can add the service to have it transcribed, which just means that I'm typing out everything that's said. And this opens up the possibility of those who are hard of hearing to be able to read it. And some people prefer to read rather than listen as well. But it also makes it keyword searchable, so that you can just go straight to, for me, maybe it's like the story of grandma about her little goat named Opal.
All right.
It's very specific, but if I just search Opal, I go straight to that memory. There's no like, oh, which chapter was this in? I don't remember. So so that is a definite benefit of having that. It's easily shareable because I basically just create a PDF of that transcript, and I also code it so that I should say timestamp it, not code it. I timestamp it so that it lines up with a particular audio file and timestamp so that if you want to go back and listen to it, you at least know what track you'll find it in and where that is.
Yeah.
And then the final one, oh, sorry, were you going to ask something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. The final kind of step in the process would be turning it from that digital state into a physical state where we turn it into a book, a hardback book that it's made by a local bookbindery that uses these, I don't want to call them ancient because it wasn't that long ago, but it's not like a machine-produced, modern machine-produced book. They're using like turn-of-the-century techniques that specifically aid in longevity and durability, which is very important to my products, because my vision for this is that, like, to be able to pull a book off the shelf, I know this is crazy, but like 500 years from now, and to be able to read about maybe my dad, to know who he was and where this family line came from. Like, I think that that's so cool.
Yeah. And I think having that in that format so that you have the longevity of that, it's an heirloom that you can pass on from generation to generation that will not only provide the history, but a very strong connection to that history in that book format. So,
yeah, I think about, like, what if we'd had something like this from all the ancestors that we have going back? Like, what stories would we have of them maybe coming over to America originally? What stories would we have of our ancestry in Europe or Africa or the Polynesian Islands? Like, we could have come from anywhere, and to have those ancient memories would just, I think that's just cool.
Yeah.
It would be awesome. I kind of nerd out about it a little bit, but another factor to think about is also that, like, when you just have either the audio or the transcript, both are digital, and kind of what you were talking about earlier about like, how do we guarantee that these things get passed on, get passed down, aren't forgotten? That is the one drawback of having them digital, is that they're not in your mind, that you're not reminded of them regularly. And if someone were to pass away and they only have these files on a computer, even if someone knows about them, like they may not be able to find them, they may not remember to go look for them, and they can just be lost. Whereas with the physical book, typically people are not just going to throw a book away or anything like that. And I actually designed them so that they are eye-catching and really beautiful books. For me, I don't know exactly why, but I always just wanted them to kind of harken back to fairy tales and the idea of like this ancient ancestry, and drawing them in with these beautiful ornate golden covers that have golden pages, so that they really are eye-catching, and that they might even invite like younger kids to be like, what is that? And for the adult to be like, let me tell you the story of your grandfather, like that type of thing.
Yeah.
I want them to be something that you're proud to keep on a bookshelf in sight or on the coffee table, where it invites people to learn about their ancestry. And you can't really do that with an audiobook or a PDF.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that kind of sums up.
So aside from that, you had some other tips that you wanted to talk about that might help us when it comes to remembering and preserving memories, so that we can have that recall of that sometimes often eludes a lot of us.
Yeah. So this can be kind of almost an aid if you're creating your timeline, but and maybe it's obvious, I'm not sure, but go back through photo albums and actually look at the pictures and try to recall any, like if it's important to you, of course, try to recall all of the details surrounding what that is. What is the subject matter? Who's in it? Where are you? When was it? What emotions come up for you? Like, does it make you feel happy or nostalgic? Does it bring up a sense of sadness, maybe because you lost that person? Just try to capture everything that you experience as you're looking at the photo. And that can also, again, help you fill in your timeline of things that happened in your life. Another one that I've personally used, so this would have been 2018, so not long ago. I went on a trip with my then boyfriend, about to become fiance, to the Pacific Northwest. And it was this epic, like 10-day trip where we went to Mount Hood, and we went down to the chateau at the Oregon Caves. We went to Crescent City, ended up in kind of the Seattle area, the Tacoma area. And so I wanted to create a memory collective entirely based around this trip, because for one, it was an epic trip, and also my then boyfriend proposed while we were at Ramona Falls, and it was really magical and amazing, and started a whole new chapter of my life. And I want to remember this as well as I do now in 40, 50 years, or, like 100 years, if they have the technology for us to live that long at that point. So one of the things that I did to help my own memory recall for that trip was first to create a timeline, second to go back through pictures, and then third to actually use Google Maps to retrace my steps of the journey to, I actually took myself down to the street view and redrove the route that we took all throughout the trip. And that was really, really cool. And it did trigger like, oh, I completely forgot about that place. And to be able to use Google Maps to say, oh, we stopped at this restaurant. That was the one that had the most amazing milkshake I've ever had in my life. Just things like that. They're little details, and maybe some people do care about those, maybe some people don't, but it's an aid if you are trying to be able to describe things that you can't actively remember all of the details to at the moment without some type of aid. Another one that is, this one is interesting, and I feel like the results will vary for everybody because it truly is kind of random. It's basically a word association, and you can do this kind of by just like, if you wanted to, there are random word generators online that you could actually pull up and do this yourself. I always give my clients one of these to work from, but you could also even just open a dictionary to a random page, point to a random word, and just keep repeating this. But the idea is that these random words will kind of draw up associations. And the reason that this works is something called the reticular activating system. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not, but.
So the reticular activating system is, it's kind of a tool that our brain uses to focus our attention. And it's the same thing, like if I told you, take the next 30 seconds and list everything in the room that is orange, then you would focus on listing all of those things that are orange. But now I'm telling you, okay, now close your eyes and tell me everything that was green. And you're probably, unless you're very, very observant and maybe know your room really well, you're probably not going to be able to come up with the things that are green because you were focused on the things that are orange.
Right.
It's the exact same reason why when you've decided to buy a new car, you see that car, that exact one that you're looking for everywhere because your brain is focused on it. It's not that there's suddenly more of that car. It's just that you are observing it, you're focused your attention on it. So I use the reticular activating system to help you recall memories, because while you're doing these processes, your reticular activating system is focused in on memory recollection. And so by showing it kind of random words and you focusing on memory, you can actually kind of trigger memories that, because they're random, they might not have come up while you were thinking about them, but they might come up through some type of a word trigger.
Right.
So that's another one. And then I'll just do one more. And this one is actually one of my favorites. It's very, very powerful. And I think this is actually one you asked originally if there are things that you can do to help retain memories longer.
Yeah.
So this one is something that I'm calling sensory painting. It might already be a thing. But the idea is that you take a memory that you have kind of a good grasp to already, and you really, really try to focus on all of the sensory details you can think of. And you can either write, if you're artistically talented, you could maybe draw a map, you could actually sketch a scene. I feel like for most people, it's probably easier to write out all the details. It doesn't have to be beautiful prose or anything like that. It could be very technical, but just writing out as much as you can remember about all the senses that you experienced during this memory, and to kind of create almost like a little piece out of it, something that you can go back to over and over. I did this specifically with a memory of visiting a place called Camp Christina with my dad. That's a place that we went camping regularly. And it was a really cool place because it was an abandoned CYO camp. So it was like hundreds of acres and we were the only two there. We literally had like this landscape to ourselves. And I have such vivid imagery but I've cemented it in my mind by doing this exercise, this sensory painting around it. So that's one of my favorite things. And I honestly feel like I have a better grasp of that memory now than I did maybe 5 years ago because I did the sensory painting work.
Well, I think it's interesting because your senses play a very important part in the memory of things.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if we just slow down and kind of interview our own mind and saying, okay, what did it smell like when I went to my grandma's house?
Yeah.
What did it sound like when I went to my grandma's house? What were some of the things that I remember seeing at grandma's house?
Mm-hmm.
And to go back and retrace the senses to bring back that memory, it's got to be a powerful tool to bring those things back. And I think sometimes even in the short-term memory side of things, if we would slow down when we get frustrated because we can't remember something, if we can slow down and maybe even do that interview process of our mind again. Yeah. Okay, well, what was it sounding like? What did it feel like? What did it smell like? Just and kind of use your senses to remind you of what you were having a hard time remembering.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that people can do is to pull up. Most people have a smartphone. If you have a powerful memory that you just experienced, take a few minutes and actually just pull out the your smartphone. Virtually every smartphone has some type of a microphone app, or you can get one, and just talk and record your feelings about whatever just happened, or whatever was so funny, or whatever your kid just did, or this achievement that you just did. Those are ways that you can kind of do this as you go. What I see is that a lot of people don't do that, which is part of where the value of like my company comes in, because it's kind of helping people have that accountability to actually take the time to do it. Because I see that a lot of people, they won't take the time. They won't remember to do that. But even like, that's something that I also can do for them. Like if they do that themselves, where they actually record their own memories just on their phone, if they send those to me, I can organize them and process them. I can transcribe them and do the whole shebang, just, without me actually conducting the interview, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and it's part of one of the things I try to do. I'm not great at it because I don't have the discipline that I probably need to have, but I try to journal things and write things down. Okay, as a kind of a recap of my day. Mm-hmm. Specifically, I do it more when I know that there are some pretty strong things that, okay, this is an event that I definitely need to remember past today. So when I'm having a day where I went down to the club for a little bit and I did a little bit of work and I sent emails out. I don't really journal that all that often, but when my business partner Steve and I, we have another podcast that we do about comedy, and when I get to interview, like we just recently did an interview of Brad Stein, who Brad's been in the comedy game for a long time, and he's just a wealth of knowledge. And I kind of wrote in my journal about the conversation with Brad and some of the insights that he shared. Now, ironically, I could go back and watch the video because it's on YouTube. I could go back and watch the video of everything we talked about, but in the journal, it kind of encapsulated those memories of what it was that meant a lot to me there, right then on that day. I might go back and watch that video 10 years from now and go, wow, I didn't remember him saying that, or, so, right. Okay. But I think just taking time to write down, hey, this is something that happened today, and I want to make sure that I kind of drive it a little bit deeper into the recesses of my mind by writing it down. And you have the didactic connection by writing what you are trying to remember, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Kara, I want to thank you for taking some time to talk with us about capturing and keeping memories in place. I love the idea of, going back and looking at memories through the different lenses of the different seasons or the different activities, or, all of those different things. As you were talking about it, I kind of wrote down here real quick, I know you mentioned the fact that you've kind of had a lot of music in your past. I grew up with my four brothers and I. We did a lot of music in our family, and so there's, just I wrote down music. I want to go back and kind of look at the different time frames of life, and what was the music what was the music we were singing. What was the music I was listening to? What was the music my parents told me was of the devil and I shouldn't be listening to? All of that stuff to remember it. And so I appreciate that idea of going back and trying to use the seasons of life, and not just seasons of life, but fall, winter, fall, spring, summer, basketball. You're from Indiana, so you had the 5 seasons, right? You had spring, summer, fall, winter, and basketball season, which was pretty much the life in Indiana. Yep. But now you go back and use those to kind of help bring up and conjure up the memories that you may have thought you lost, but they're there, and you just need to find the connection to get it to. I often kind of describe multiple sclerosis in a way that, because of the way that it attacks the nerves in the brain and causes the damage, that sometimes it takes everything in the processes of the brain a little bit longer to accomplish what it needs to accomplish. I kind of describe it as, if I wanted you to take a truckload of paper from Indianapolis to New York City, could you do that? If you could drive a truck, yes, you could. Then I say, well, now I want you to do that same thing, but you can't take any interstates, you can't take any 4-lane highways, and you can only take left-hand turns. Can you still do it? Yes, you probably could, but it's going to take you a whole lot longer.
Yep.
And it's going to take a lot more fuel. And that's kind of what happens with the way MS attacks the brain, is it's going to take us a lot longer to get around to accomplishing getting the messages sent the way they're supposed to be and where they're going. And so maybe it's just a process of utilizing some of these concepts of, let's go back through the seasons, let's go back through the activities, and help us to find the left-hand turns that it's going to take for us to get that memory out of the storage unit that it's stuck in.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you remembered. I wish that I had remembered to say that one, the music, because that's a huge part of my childhood as well. And I can, whenever you, and actually, sorry, I was going to mention one more idea, depending on how kind of quirky and creative you feel, music is a really, really powerful tool of memory. If you think about all the songs that you can remember the lyrics to, our brains remember rhythm and melody a lot better than just the spoken word. And so if you can find a way, this would create or require a bit of creativity, but if you can kind of almost create some type of a song or a jingle or something around a specific memory that you want to remember, that actually might have more of an impact for certain people to be able to remember those longer.
Right.
The same way that you have like bards in the old days that would create songs and long poems and epics and things like that that would be recited over and over. But when they're done in song format, they're much easier to remember.
Right. Well, and anything that we can use that will help us trigger the memory and help us get that that file that's stuck some places in the recesses of our brain. It's there. We just can't seem to recall it. We can't get that function to come back. I think anything we can use that will help us to trigger that and bring it back in, it will be a beneficial tool for us to pull out and utilize. So, well, Kara, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us the thoughts and ideas and telling us a little bit about the Memory Collective and helping us not just if we have MS, but in pretty much everything, how we can do things to retain and restore and hold on to those memories for the long haul and be able to bring them back later. I appreciate that very much. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you at our marketing group. I probably should have said that at the beginning. Kara and I belong to a business networking group where we've kind of become, by its nature, I think we've become marketing partners where we're kind of helping bring referrals and all those things together. And so we get to see each other about once a week, whether it's on a video call or when we meet face to face. But Kara, I look forward to seeing you on Monday. And thanks for joining us here on the MS Warriors Way podcast.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
So that pretty much wraps up our time here today. And before I head out, I want to remind you that if you found anything helpful today, anything that was beneficial, please like the video and share the video. Please subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave a comment, and I will try to respond and get back to you on that as soon as I possibly can. But without anything else for me to say, I'm going to challenge you the way I typically do at the end of every one of my podcasts, and that's that you live your life in such a way that, well, let's put it this way. Live today in a way that makes yesterday jealous because it didn't get to have you that way, and it's going to make tomorrow giddy with excitement that you're coming, and it wants to be there when you get there. So live your way in some powerful and fun activities, and share a life of laughter and love with everybody. And so until next time, we'll see you again here on the MS Warriors Way podcast and Multiple Sclerosis TV.